Welcome to week 15 of the class and the last week of the semester. In this week, we're considering stress and health. And I want to begin by considering a well-known syndrome called post-traumatic stress disorder. So the first question that we want to confront is, what is post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, as it's often called? And it seems to occur whenever there's been a serious trauma. Much of this, in the common parlance, comes about because of combat experience and soldiers that have seen horrific things and then come back and have difficulty living with it. But it can also occur in other places. Another common discussed place is when there's been sexual assault, but also natural disasters, accidents. Anything that imposes an extreme stress upon the person can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder. So what are the symptoms of PTSD? Well, the text begins to discuss this topic on page 383, 383. But I found this very interesting set of figures and symptoms from the post-traumatic stress disorder website listed here, from the Veterans Administration. And the symptoms include things like reliving the event, which is also called re-experiencing, avoiding situations that remind you of the event, negative changes in beliefs and feelings, and feeling keyed up all the time, called hyperarousal. Now, interestingly, on that website, there are these figures which show that of 61% of the people who experience a trauma, if you're a man, 8% of you will develop PTSD. But if a woman, 51% experiencing a trauma, leads to a higher 20% developing PTSD. At the bottom of this section in the text on page 384, the text lists a variety of other symptoms that can occur from the stress itself and also from the relived stress that is PTSD. These things include a variety of symptoms that are natural, such as increased respiration, heart rate, things like that. And I think in order to really understand this syndrome, you have to do much better than I just did in that diagram, but it does give us the basics. What I want to do from here is to take us to a new conversation, one that we've actually had before, which talks about how you control PTSD. And I want to look into one type of research that was done by Amy Arnsten at Yale that suggests maybe one way in that is using familiar techniques of levels of brain function that we've used in this class before. From the point of view of the Arnsten lab, the important thing for our class in Psych 1 is the frontal cortex control over the amygdala, which is shown in this figure here, where the exposure to uncontrollable stress produces a reduction in the prefrontal cortex function and control. And you see at the top we have stress going through a bunch of biochemical mechanisms, resulting in a change in amygdala function at the bottom, something that's having to do with emotion. And the text reads, the rapid switch from reflective to reflexive brain systems, which suggests that we're not going to be so contemplative about something, but we're going to react more. And this could be at the core of what's happening with post-traumatic stress disorders. We, the prefrontal cortex, have sort of lost control of the other we, the amygdala, which reacts emotionally to things. In another class, some of those biochemical mechanisms of control of prefrontal cortex to the amygdala might be the subject of further discussion. But I want to stop here and just tell you that a couple of neurosciences ago, this is a Society for Neuroscience meeting, I was in the audience when Amy Arnsten gave a really brilliant talk about a patient who had post-traumatic stress disorder. And she gave this patient a drug which manipulated the way the prefrontal cortex connected to the deeper amygdala and allowed more control biochemically by changing the way the two connections worked to give the prefrontal control back to the patient. And this single patient, she reported, had some relief in the post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms. The patient said, as I recall, that he basically could think himself a little bit more out of the trouble that he was in and had to rely less on things like alcohol to numb himself and had fewer thoughts of suicide. So it does look like there is a way that we can maybe begin to treat some of the stresses, in some cases by thinking things through. Now, another experience I had was with a professor at Queens College who was talking about stress, and she made the analogy to rethinking the frame around something that you were doing, such as you're taking a test in organic chemistry and you're pre-med and you're stressed out, that you can maybe reframe that and think of this as something that isn't so personally wounding to you and controlling of you, but rather just an exercise through which you're going. And when you do that, you might de-stress, and in this case, she was arguing that the de-stressing might improve your performance. So this is an example of how a bad experience can lead to a long-term sort of ingrained condition called post-traumatic stress disorder, which has a set of symptoms. I gave you 4 of them, there are more. That then can be seen as an example of higher control dysfunction, where we can't sort of talk ourselves down from having those memories make us our prisoner, and it makes us sick. And maybe there's ways to intervene by just thinking, or having friends to support you, or maybe possibly someday in the future even taking a drug that will better establish this control. In any case, stress through post-traumatic stress disorder is certainly a worthy topic of study in intro psych.